Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Bigfoot Notes from the Field chat that we do. Brian's here with me. Gerald's been trying to get on. He's having some issues, so hopefully he'll come on, and I don't know who else is coming on tonight. But first of all, let's give our friends at Sasquatch Coffee. This is our only commercial that we do, so we'll give Gunner and everyone at Sasquatch Coffee a shout-out, and Monster X Radio also. And, of course, we have to plug our own stuff as well. So this is... and Shane Church created this art. If you want to see this more closely, it's on my website, williamjevning.com. David's favorite coffee, that's right. So Shane is actually a man of many talents. He's working on a couple other pieces of art at the moment, and everybody will get a kick out of those. And, of course, I've had some real problems. I'd hoped to have the new podcast, Witness of the Unknown, up and going. I'd hope to have it going by the 3rd of July. Of course, 3rd of July has come and gone, and it hasn't happened. And the main glitch has been getting the intro for the show done. And while it may not sound like a big deal, it kind of is, because you want to have a nice show, especially if this one's going to be a premium content show. It's only $5 a month, but I still want to give people something really nice for their $5. So I've spent a few bucks trying to get what I want, and I mean a few bucks. It's been a little more expensive than I thought, and it's just been horrible, the experience. So thankfully, a couple of friends, Shane Church being one of them, has taken on the task of working on building the intro for the podcast, and another one of our friends has been working on it also. So between Shane and our other guy Chris, they're doing sort of a collaboration. Chris is very busy in medical school right now, so his time is very limited. So I know Shane's usually here listening to the blab. So that's pretty much going on, and they're gonna yeah, we can hear you. They're sort of going to have a meeting of the mind.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you. You're there.
Okay.
So there isn't
every time.
There isn't a whole lot of real news at the moment there's one area that I can't talk about right now, so I'll just won't say anything about that. On an interesting development, though, and I probably shouldn't say who just yet until he's willing to say something about it. But our old friend Rick Dyer is apparently trying to make a comeback. So he's been sending friend requests to certain people on Facebook, and it's anyone's guess what he's up to this time. So, and of course, everyone who's listening probably knows who Rick Dyer is. One of the biggest hoaxers out there, and the guy must have some kind of mental problems if he's trying to, keeps coming back into this topic, coming up with something crazy, bilking people out of money. And I think when he paraded the last one around that he called Hank, around charging people money, what I was told he made over $100,000 doing that, which is, I think, absolutely insane. And I really feel sorry for the people who fell for giving him money. I don't know if Hank is back, but Dyer apparently is in the beginning stages of trying to make a comeback. So people have contacted me saying that he sent them friend requests, which they, deleted immediately. But
hey, Will, let me ask you. Okay, what? Yeah. So from what I understand, he took like an ape suit and put pig guts or something in it. What was his? What was his mindset? Because he had to know eventually people are going to find out it's a hoax. What was the goal there? I don't understand what he was thinking.
That's a good question. Well, the goal, I think, was simply to make money. Now, I was told, I don't know this directly, but I was told by people who said they, had some discussion with him or something. There was some sort of a connection there. That he had bought some big fancy truck, had this really expensive trailer, towing this display around, and it cost a lot of money to buy this stuff. And he was, I can't remember what he was charging people, but I was told he made over $100,000 selling this faked stuff, and people were paying into it and buying it. You're buying into it. I mean, it's as bad as Todd Standing with his. I don't think he's hooked up with Biscardi, but I wouldn't put anything past the guy. I mean, if you there's a certain list of hoaxers out there and knotheads in this subject, and Rick Dyer sort of leads the charge in that group. So let's hope. Let's keep our eyes open, folks, this time. And if he comes out with something, please scrutinize it very, very carefully. Just the fact that if it has Dyer's name attached to it, there's probably something wrong with it right from the get-go. So what's happening there, Gerald? I see you've made it on okay?
Well, I'll tell you why it's a struggle every time with me. You know how that
Well, that's why I start early, to make sure we get you on here.
I know it takes you at least 15 minutes.
So Biscardi is on a cross-country expedition. Expedition being the operative word. I don't keep tabs on some of these guys. I hadn't heard that, so I don't know. Maybe he's teaming up with the Not Finding Bigfoot crew. I don't know. With Biscardi, who knows? I mean, and same with Dyer, and I don't know. Maybe they're all going to team up with Melba Ketchum and some of the other Looney Tunes out there and form their own group or something. I have no idea.
Should be interesting.
Well, yeah, that's a word for it. Oh, Bruce says he started.
Would you pay $7 to watch
Bruce
it? Says
he started in New Hampshire, moving west. Well, with Biscardi, I'm sure whatever kind of movement it is, we have no idea what kind of a movement he's doing, but again, I'm sure at some point we'll hear from him. He's another one that's out trying to make a buck, and it's almost always hoaxed. So Brian came up with a subject for tonight's discussion. I was trying to think of something, and Brian came up with an idea. He says, well, we could talk about where Sasquatches sleep. And I thought, well, let's broaden that just a little bit. Let's talk about the day in the life of a Sasquatch. Now, obviously, we don't know, what all includes their activities throughout a day. But, he says, I guess to search for the truth doesn't make enough money. Yeah, unfortunately, that seems to be the way it is. Whatever garbage gets put out there. And I guess before we start, I did want to mention again, it was a real pleasure doing Midnight in the Desert, Art Bell's show a couple of weeks ago. And Heather Wade, the host, who's actually hosting the show now, Art's sort of behind the scenes controlling things there. But she did a really awesome job as an interviewer. And she's one of the few people that is the heart of a big show out there who doesn't like nonsense. She really likes things to be sort of on track and credible, and searching for the truth and sort of trying to avoid the nonsense out there. So my hat's off to her, and I wish her luck in that pursuit. Hopefully she'll like what we've been trying to do, is sort of direct, this topic in the right direction, getting it away from nonsense, taking out of the hands of people that are just really have no business dealing with this. And she's another one. She's really doing a great job and trying to steer. Of course, her show encompasses a number of topics, whether it be paranormal or otherwise. But she's trying to do a great job in terms of directing things in a credible light. So I'm looking forward to seeing more media people do that. Now, Brian, you asked the question initially is about where Sasquatches sleep. And I thought that was a great topic to start with. And of course, we need everyone's participation here, what your thoughts are and questions, both you guys and the folks listening. But I can say I've seen Sasquatch bedding on 2 occasions. The first time was many years ago, and it was in a stormy conditions up this mountain. It was raining like crazy, and I just happened to I was trying to get out of the rain with my buddies, and I were searching this area, and we were getting out of the rain into this particularly thick area of cedar trees. And there was a big fallen log. I mean, a really big one, probably 3-4 feet thick. And on the side, shielded from the wind and the rain, was this huge mass of ferns, and they were freshly picked. And it probably covered, 9-10 feet in length and about 6 feet wide on the backside. And it looked like it would have been very comfortable, right?
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't know what to think about it. I mean, I didn't know if it was Sasquatch related or what. I mean, it could have been a hunter up there, but it wasn't hunting season, So I didn't really know what to think of it. So, do they seek out caves and makeshift hutches? Surprisingly, all the years that I worked Skamania and Clark counties in southern Washington now, Skamania County is honeycombed with lava tubes. And Gerald, you know this, living in that area. I've seen quite a few of them in that region, especially north of Carson, and have never seen one that was used by any animal for bedding or any otherwise. These things, the weather seems to not bother them. They seem to just be right out in the weather, and they may even like the colder weather, because the times that I've seen tracks in that region in particular, the tracks were going from below the snow line up into the snow. So I really don't think the weather bothers them that much. What do you?
Yeah, I think they pretty much adapt to the area they're in, don't they?
Yeah, I think pretty much, sure.
Yeah, I think because I've had, I can only go by what I've encountered out there myself. They do maybe, as we've talked before, they may leap up high. They know where the hunters are. They know where the elk are, the deer are, they know their routines. I've early mornings between 9 and noon. That's when I seen one last year. It was around 11 o'clock a.m. And we've been tracked out. We've been followed out. Pretty much, they'll. Man, my head's not working. I'm so tired, Will. I've been working so many 12-hour shifts. It's unbelievable.
Have you ever seen anything?
So I'm trying to.
Ever seen anything you thought was bedding in that area?
Not really. Not really. I never really went to look. If they are, they're going to be in the thicker brush, I think. I don't think they're going to be out in the open where they can be caught.
Yeah, exactly.
They're smart. They're smart. They know where to go. If they do.
When we were working that Yacold area back in 89 and 90, and that was really the second time I saw anything I would consider bedding, was we'd hear them at night, right around dusk. They'd come down off Yacold Mountain, and they come into that, I guess that's the south end of the Yacold Valley there, towards Molten Falls and that area. And
sure, that's just
what they would do is they would go down into those fields, and there were no cattle or anything in those fields, so it was just the grass was pretty pristine there. It was tall field grass, and I would go down. There was a trail, and I would go down. I had a routine, a circuit that I would follow just about every day in the morning, and I would check for any new sign after first light. And I remember that area being totally pristine, the grass untouched, and then there were one or two mornings we found, and now this is where they weren't crop circles, but they were round areas that were flattened down by something that came in there, and you could see kind of rolled around. And we found probably, not all at one time. This happened over a month or so. Maybe 5 or 6 of these. They were relatively close together, but they were no more than 10, 15 feet across is what they measured from one side to the next. And it was just where something big had laid down in there and rolled around in that grass. And that was probably, when these things don't really, they don't really need beds. It's kind of like gorillas. It's sort of a vestigial behavior. I think I said that right. Sort of a leftover from a previous evolutionary stage in their existence. Where at one time, their species did make beds regularly, and then when they moved on to another stage, they sort of quit that. Sometimes they'd make them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they make partial beds. That's kind of the way they work. So these guys I think are kind of the same way. Sometimes they make them. Probably most of the time they don't. I think where they sleep is probably more important than how they sleep.
If they're in a family unit, they may have a different area to sleep than if we have a single one running around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because
whether or not the female with the baby.
I was just saying, here in Florida, I've heard that they actually will go into alligator. I don't want to call them caves necessarily. I don't know what they're called, but where alligators sleep, whatever.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
I think some people might. I don't know. I really don't know a whole lot about what goes on in that part of the country, Brian. I mean, it's really interesting because of the different type that lives there than what I'm used to dealing with here in the Northwest. So what they do and that particular type might do is maybe completely different than what they're doing here. So I've been kind of, really open to listening to what's going on in your part of the country, just because, I'm not real familiar with that particular set of behaviors.
Right. And of course there's different types, right? The type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. So what is one type in one part of the country might be predominantly a different type in another part of the country.
Absolutely. For instance, in the western part of the country and the northwestern in particular, we have the type 1s. In the southeast, it's predominantly the type 2s. And then of course, the other two types actually the type 4 seems to be more the northeastern part of the country where Jeremiah is. And by the way, Jeremiah should be back with us Monday or Tuesday from his business. So I'm kind of looking forward to him getting back. And hearing what's going on there. So, and then of course the type 3. Now the type 3, that's the one we seem to know that one actually, the type 3 and the type 4. We're learning a lot more about the type 4s because of Jeremiah's work in the Northeast. But the type 3 seem to be predominantly along the Mississippi River drainage region. So, I was told roughly 500 miles either side of the Mississippi River drainage system. That's kind of where they're concentrated. So, and then on a side note, that might be what people are calling dogman, just because of their physical makeup. I really don't believe there's any such thing as a werewolf-looking creature running around. There's absolutely nothing that would work that way. So, hey, Joe. He's just as this works on his iPad. So the best place to spot a Bigfoot would be to set up camp near large game tracks. I would be careful about setting up near game trails because that's one of the areas they hunt at. So I would set up away from places like that, and then maybe go take a look in the daytime at places like that. But I definitely wouldn't. What was the Jurassic Park movie? Was it the second one where they were out trying to capture the T-Rex and they talked about being in the game trail, and they said they wanted to move the movable buffet or whatever. I'd hate to be set up as a buffet for a Bigfoot. So I don't want to set up my camp where they're feeding.
Well, if you're I could see setting up a tree stand, where you're up off the air, you're not pushing your center around. If you come in too low, you're just you'll push the game away. Yeah. If they're using the game trail and your scent's there, they're not going to come in there, which might divert whatever you see as Sasquatch.
Yeah, the big thing is you can get relatively close to where they're feeding, and of course that's having some knowledge of the game animals in the area. Or in their case, anything for them is pretty much fair game. So where there's a concentration of wildlife. Now we talk about, a day in the life of a Sasquatch. So what are they doing during a 24-hour time period? They hunt basically 2 times a day. and most of the times at night. It's usually right after sunset, and then again before sunrise. Sometimes they'll hunt during the day, but the problem with daytime hunting is it's easier to get seen and heard. The animals are a little bit more alert. Not that they're not alert at night, but a lot of times if deer are bedding down, they're gonna be up feeding if there's a lot of bright moonlight. But if it's rainy or cloud covered, they're going to be up feeding at night. So, or bedded down rather. So, you kind of have to take weather conditions into consideration, and what the food is doing basically, and just don't be in their feeding areas when they're feeding. Now we had Nathan and Jeremiah's teams both go out, and unfortunately both teams went out when they were feeding, but they did have exactly the same results when it came to that. I told them what to do and how to go in there and find these groups, and they both went in and they did find the groups. Nathan kept going after his group and it eventually chased him out of the area, where Jeremiah followed my suggestions, and they're still able to go in there and find evidence because he didn't disturb the group. So, but that being said, you can, it all depends on how you approach them. Stay out of the areas when they're feeding, and you can have a prolonged observation of their behaviors and finding evidence. So now, as far as sleeping goes and bedding down, well, they're going to sleep pretty much wherever they want to sleep. And like you said, Gerald, that's a great point. They're going to be in thickets where they're not seen. Being a high-level predator, they're going to keep it out of sight most of the time. And that goes back to what, a lot of people, and it's all part of this whole thing where people say, well, I'm going to go drive out there and I'm going to see Bigfoot. Well, I say good luck with that, because it's not going to happen. And simply because if you say, oh, I'm going to go out and see a cougar today, what are the chances of that happening? And why is it that's not going to happen?
0.
Yeah. And why is it that's not going to happen?
Well, bottom line is that the area is so big, for one thing. If you do see one, I've never seen a cougar out running across the road. I've always seen them in the brush. Always. The area is so vast up here. Will. Yeah. The odds of even something remote to that, just driving around, is. Yeah, you'd probably win the lottery before you'd ever see one. Yeah,
it's pretty iffy.
Literally.
When we saw that big gray one back in 1988, I think that was a complete fluke. I think it was because it was near that noisy river. And where I'm talking about, where that what's called locally Apache Cave there, how noisy the Washougal River is right there. It's fast moving water. It just kind of roars through there, and I think the fact that I come around that bend unseen, because the road kind of goes up and it curves, it happened to be just the right place with the right set of conditions. And, we popped around the corner and it didn't hear us, was unable to see us. And as soon as it did see us, it took off immediately. But that's a rare event in this subject. If
Reggie and I were from that area here last year, and we found that one tree break, and that tree break was like 10 feet off the ground. Right. It was amazing.
Oh, when you find one of those, it's pretty interesting. That's something else too. I mean, on a normal basis, when it comes to, now these guys on a daily basis, most of their behaviors is in the pursuit of food, because they need a minimum of 15,000 calories a day for survival. So they're always eating. They're always on the lookout for food. So that's most of their behavior. And everything they do is pretty much geared around survival, which means either they're looking for food, and that's also goes hand in hand with staying away from predators or any kind of dangers. And we're a big part of that when it comes to, what they're doing. They're purposely staying away from us. If they are encountering people, there's some very specific things going on. And most time when people, report an encounter with these things, they haven't really grasped the larger picture of what's going on. You know, they saw the creature, had the whatever interaction, and then there was the end of the interaction where, you know, they parted company, and you know, they never understand what was really going on, and all these people out there who claim they're, you know, call themselves researchers and experts and all these things, none of those people grasp the larger picture of what's really going on. So you have a lot of our friends that are skeptics out there, and rightly questioning these things, because, you know, what a lot of these people say, because nobody's ever tried to grasp the larger picture of what's going on, and it's almost always involves the pursuit of food and just general survival.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So that's kind of the day of the life of a Sasquatch.
And also, Will, you made a good point a while ago. Maybe I'm not sure how many podcasts ago, but that these things probably don't sleep like humans. Like, you know how like humans sleep for 8 hours consecutively, but most animals don't do that. They sleep like 2 hours, then 2 hours later, and then 2 hours later, and
even in our primitive state before we became civilized, our sleep patterns were the same way. Sleep a couple hours, get up and do things for a while, sleep a little bit. You know, it was sort of sleep activity throughout the 24-hour cycle. It wasn't, we're not really designed for a straight hour. I guess we are now, but it wasn't the way we were originally made up, you know, to sleep in an 8-hour cycle.
Right.
And
you know, that's a good point, Brian. That's a good point. You know, if you ever watch a deer they'll hit a REM sleep really quick, and maybe 10 minutes, and then they're wide awake again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's you know, so you really kind of have to look at these things from, you know, you can't look at it from a people perspective. You have to look at it from their perspective, basically, or from their angle. You know, what do they need throughout the day? You know, they need sustenance.
I agree.
Yeah, they need sustenance, so they need to be in the places where they get the sustenance. They need to be doing things that allow them, and they have to be extremely good hunters because of just the sheer amount of calories they require, which means they're extremely stealthy. They're not in clusters. They're going to be, you know, spread out as individuals. So now, my understanding through my sources is part of the time they hunt as individuals, then the other part of the time they'll hunt as a group. You know, so there's a couple different things going on there, but it makes sense. I mean, if you're taking care of either old, young, whatever in a group, it's easier to hunt as a group. You have a coordinated hunt, you know, so you can take things back for those individuals who maybe can't participate in the hunt yet, and certainly young ones would fit that criteria. But and then hunting as an individual, you maximize what you get in terms of caloric intake, so that you can continue, you know, the next step, which is hunting as a group. You've already been fed. You can want to do these things. So there's sort of that. What do they call it? There's a pyramid. They talk about survival pyramid, and you have the basic needs at the base of it, and then you go up from there. So, Lisa's, of course, live on an island of Newfoundland.
You know, relating back to my experience last year, that makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they came in as a group at that time, and they were situated around that drainage down through Rush Creek,
right?
Where, regardless of wherever the animals went, they had it covered.
Oh yeah, right.
They had it covered.
And see, and when you look at the way chimps hunt,
so they could easily.
And I use the example of chimps. You know, they have very coordinated attack patterns when it comes to their hunting. Newfoundland, he talks about a lot of moose. So imagine the type of animal Bigfoot feeds on there. Absolutely. Moose, elk, deer. Really, what I was told, pretty much anything they can get a hold of is what they feed on. But yeah, absolutely. You know, a big game animal like that is going to have lots of food potential. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, the way they came in on you, Gerald, that was a real classic. I mean, that was very well coordinated It happened quickly. Yep. The only glitch on their part was they thought it was an elk instead of a person.
Right. That's why hunting over. I kind of go for the calling now. If you really want to see one, if you're in an area where it's likely that they could be, and you're sitting in a tree stand over a bait site, they already know that bait site's there.
Sure.
They're going to hunt that bait site because you're hunting that bait site.
And part of the problem, one of the things you have to remember too, is they're going to be watching you as you move into that area most of the time.
Right.
That's one of the reasons. Also, a lot of
I don't even know if they knew I was in there at that time because
right.
Normally I try to get out of there before it gets that late because I know to get out of there before it gets that late. But it was running to the end of the year. I wanted to get my elk, and I had to create something. I had to make something happen. So that's when I did my calling sequence.
What?
And I think
I was going to say one of the things in that particular case, they may not have really paid attention to that area. They may have been focusing very hard on the hunt itself. Maybe they were onto those elk, and try to get in a position. And then when you made the sound, maybe they, like I said, maybe they weren't. They may have been approaching the herd from another direction, and really weren't focusing on the direction you came in. You know what I mean? Where most of the time,
because usually they're coming.
Yeah, I mean, if a lot of people casually go out and they think, well, they never see a Bigfoot. Well, if they're using sentries or whatever the case is, they know almost all the time when people are kind of coming into an area. But there are occasions like yours where there's a lot going on there. There are hunters in the area, so they're avoiding the hunters. Now, there were hunters in other parts of that area, correct?
Yeah.
So they may not have. They may not have been aware that you were there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they knew I was there.
Yeah.
Because normally I am out of there by that time. I just feel very uncomfortable in there once it passed 6:30.
Right.
Yeah. And that's no kidding. That is no kidding. They're very consistent in this area, and they've been that way for the last 5 years. And it's kind of like I've kind of learned to know their movements when they're coming in, where they're going out, from Robert's game trail cam that we caught up there at his site. They hunt till they hear you coming. And now I know that they wait for when we set the alarm on our cars. When we set the alarm on our cars when they leave.
Oh yeah.
That's about 6:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been growled at twice coming out of there when I came in too late, when I was leaving too late. And normally they'll doggone it, I can't think of the word I wanted to say. Oh man. Trying to get my head to work.
Over time.
Anyway, it's killing me. I need to get out there. I need to get out there and do some research. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, Bruce says, I bet they don't like their hunting. Absolutely, they dislike their hunting being disrupted. they can get, that's one thing you have to always remember. These things have a short temper, and it doesn't take much to set them off sometimes.
Yeah, well, remember that's.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, remember that story in the in the book where there was a kid that was. Remember, there was two kids on like a trail or something, and one of them just froze, like a deer ran past them, and then the big right. Sasquatch got, like, the one guy just took off, and then the Sasquatch came, and he just stood there in shock. But you could tell that the Sasquatch was really pissed that he got in the way of the hunting of the deer.
That was the Hugh Brown encounter. Yeah. They apparently had interrupted the Sasquatch's deer hunt, and they were none too happy about it. And you find that, I mean, if you really dig into some of these situations, these cases, and like I said, if you take the time to figure out what the bigger picture is, a lot of times there's usually game or there's something involving food, and there's a reason that people see them, because most of the time they don't have to let people see them. There's something going on where they're either exposing themselves for a specific reason or what have you, but there's much more going on than people realize in these encounters. And a lot of times it could be because they're ticked off about their hunting was interrupted, or there's some dynamic going on there that causes them to react to people being in the area. It's like the lady. I mean, I can't tell you how many times lately I've heard people tell me that they were like, Gerald, you were growled at, or the lady up north, northern Washington, where the Sasquatch came out on the trail and bared its teeth at her. And a number of cases where teeth were bared at them, or even sometimes like the guy that we talked about a couple weeks ago that was beat up and was mauled inside of his house by one of these things. And in that case, we think it was probably related to the fact that there'd been plenty of food around his ranch and available, and then of course it had been disappearing periodically. And when the guy was gone for a couple months, there was no more food, so it was probably ticked off. And we hear that especially in the South, your part of the country, where locals will say, don't feed the things, because if you stop feeding them, there's a violent reaction many times. So, there's lots of things that set them off.
Not only that, but they lose their fear of humans. Absolutely. That's what they say about the alligators, is to not feed them, not because they're going to be an immediate threat, but if you start feeding them, then they're going to lose their fear of humans, and they're just going to be more dangerous, And
remember last week I talked briefly about Yellowstone Park, where that exact thing happened with bears. People would feed bears casually out their car windows, and they thought it was cute until bears started ripping the doors off cars because people weren't getting the food they wanted. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that goes in the part of that behavior too. I mean, if these things are, I'm sure, have certain habits, like we were talking about hunting. Now they'll typically, I mean, there's some circumstances that aren't the norm, but I mean, like with the Ackle thing, they were there in that area for 9 months before moving on. But typically, about every 14, 15 days, they'll forage and hunt one area, then they'll move on to the next, and they'll continue that movement throughout their range on an annual cycle. So, which is another reason they're so difficult to catch up with. Now, like in Gerald's area, now they stick around there, although you might have a couple different groups overlapping there, Gerald. So, because that one group does circulate around, but there is another group in that area.
Well, we had a lot of fires last year too, Will, that displaced a lot of hunters, a lot of animals, and probably a Sasquatch.
Oh yeah, it's going to disrupt their.
So that could have been a totally different group.
Yeah, and see, and again, it takes a long time to learn the dynamics of the movements of the different groups. You have to identify how many groups are in that region, what their cycle looks like, and how they behave, because one group isn't going to behave the same way the next group is. It's a real crapshoot. I mean, unless you really spend the time to learn it's just guesswork.
I think you're right, because about 15 days, that sounds about right, because we're baiting our animals, so we're keeping the animals there.
Yeah.
Right. Elk will go in their rotation too. They'll go into certain areas and then circle back around and hit it. But we'll have 2 or 3 separate herds come through our sites. And so I think that's kind of what keeps them there, because they're there and they're plentiful. There's a lot of elk up in that region.
Yeah, if they're not being disturbed, and if they're not being disturbed by people.
Right.
Oops. Now my phone wants to ring. I'll ignore it. It'll stop ringing in a couple of minutes. But yeah, I mean, and that's why, and we never did find out in the Ackle area why they were there so long. Do you think the groups are the same type? Do different types coexist? Yeah, actually they do. Jeremiah talked about with his work in the upper part of New York, and Don will bear this out. You guys found evidence of types 1, 2, and 4. I mean, the groups. Of course, the groups don't commingle or anything like that, but they're in the same general area. So in some places, absolutely, you'll see more than one type in an area. I see you got a friend there, Gerald.
Yeah, that's my daughter. This is Trixie.
So, Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any experience with encounters or anything, but that 15 days seems like it's probably, it sounds reasonable. But let me ask you, do you think that they're all nocturnal or mostly nocturnal? Because I've heard it kind of both ways.
Yeah.
Well, they're equally functional in day or night. They're not really nocturnal, but I think the reason for the activity at night more than daytime is involved with hunting. Especially, we know for certain that they're hunting deer. When they move into an area, one of the things they do is they almost always immediately go into hunting behavior. Through my inside contacts, there was one particular group that came in. This was 2012 that came in from Northern Oregon. In fact, they were actually kind of pushed in there, and almost immediately. And I had GPS coordinates for their location for about every 15 days for a little over 2 months, from the beginning of October 2012 through the end of November. So, and they would move just about every 14, 15 days in kind of a circular fashion. And what they would do is they would immediately, as soon as they would stop moving, they would go into this deer hunting pattern. It was in very specific places, and usually it was to be coming in from a concealed position, so the deer would be least likely to detect them. So that's sort of how it works. And then they when they completed a circle in that area, and it was kind of a large circle, they went back across the Columbia River into Northern Oregon. So
right. Well, let me ask you too. This is maybe this is again a difference between like kind of the Southeast versus the Pacific Northwest, but like the moving every 15 days. What about like down here in Florida, in the Orlando area, there are some areas like in Lake County that's not too far from here that there have been sightings and stuff, but it seems like it would be difficult for them to move across large areas because you have cities, you have the city people.
Right.
So how do they just do it surreptitiously, or do they just kind of go in sort of a shorter radius or area, if you will?
Well, and again, with those types, that particular type, and we're talking of type 2s predominantly in that area, it might be that the range size is different. The behaviors are probably different. And again, there's a lot of things we don't know about that particular type. And it may be they stay in a more localized area. Maybe the cycle is smaller.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And again, it depends on the food availability, because in the Northwest, you've got vast areas, and it requires, a large animal like that to be on the move all the time, to keep from depleting food in an area. And then again, when they come back through that area, the following cycle, they're not coming in the same place. They alter where they go, and they may not come to the same place for 5, 6, 10 years, whatever it works out to being. But in that part of the country, that's something we have to really learn yet, because we don't know a lot about their particular movements. Like you said, when they're in close proximity to where there's people and areas are blocked, we have to really look to see what's available to them. How can they move through those areas? What are their needs? Are the needs getting met? There may be a lot more food, so they don't need to move that much.
Right.
One thing I found as far as they're hunting, I don't think they have to be that far off of a game trail. I don't think their scent alerts animals like our scent does, because of the pictures that Robert got last year. That one, it wasn't more than, I would say, 20 yards off the bait pile, and pretty close to the open. He was sitting next to a tree.
Yeah.
It's so much. It's pretty overwhelming trying to correlate all the information. I've learned a lot from you, and I'll tell you what, what I've learned from you saved my life last year, and I have no doubt.
They don't typically move very far from a game trail. And I'll tell you how I figured that out. I figured that out about 10, 11 years ago. And I've told this before. My brother-in-law and I were up here in Northern California in one of the areas, and it was in a place where we see a lot of scat in the area, a lot of Bigfoot scat in the summer. And I wanted to go down along this particular creek that was in a valley, just to have a look down there. We were up in the high areas. And when we went down there, there was sort of a grassy, flat area that went from the creek to the tree line that was probably 100 to 200 yards across. And I told my brother-in-law, I said, you walk along the creek and I'll go over here by the tree line. And I kept thinking, well, how come we're not seeing any scat down here? It was all over the place, up higher along the roads, everywhere. So I got thinking, well, if you're a big animal, you're not going to want to spend a lot of energy. See, a lot of people in this subject, they think, oh, these things are just wandering around out through the forest, and they should be easy to see and take pictures of. That's the wrong attitude. That's not what they're doing at all. They're very stealthy predators, and they're like big cats and other predators. They're almost impossible to see because of what they're doing. They're trying to make a living. So I thought to myself, okay, if you're a big animal and you have a large requirement for food every day, you're not going to want to waste that in an area where it's difficult to come by. So how do you get around that problem? Well, you find a game trail or other areas where the game is coming to, and you sit and wait in a hidden position, and then you ambush them. They come through. You have a quick burst of energy. You're saving calories. You use that quick burst of energy on an almost a sure meal, and it's a win-win situation for them. So I started looking inside that tree line. There were piles of crap everywhere in the first 20 feet or so inside the tree line. That's where they were. And again, if you were just wandering around that area, you wouldn't see them inside the tree line. They'd see you. They could hide out while, you're the threat, while you pass, and they're still in their hunting position. They haven't lost anything. They haven't lost their position. They've avoided the predator, you, and they're still maintaining their low level of expenditure of energy while they're waiting for a meal. So Bruce is in the southeast.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean, it was when it dawned on me this is what they were doing. It made total sense. Then I knew instantly why people weren't just seeing them randomly. Which is the people in the Bigfoot community. That's their train of thought is, oh well, I'm just going to go out and see one wandering around. Well, that's not the way they work at all. That's a absolute wrong mindset.
That's why most encounters. That's why most encounters are kind of like by accident, because people aren't looking for them. People aren't looking for them. Yeah.
They're either there's some kind of an accident, and then usually, like I said, if you take the time to really dig into what's going on in the bigger picture, where sightings are taking place, there's something going on where it wasn't an accidental encounter. It's almost like the Sasquatch did it on purpose. And you just have to figure out what was the reasoning. Why did it do that? Why did it have come into this encounter with these people or this person? There was something going on that made that happen.
Right.
A lot of times it isn't just a chance encounter.
Yeah. Context.
Yeah, exactly. The context. Bruce says in the southeast, you don't have the different elevations and ecosystems. Bigfoot move between ecosystems here in the Pacific Northwest, for example. Yeah, that's true. It's a whole different it's a whole different context. I mean, there's everything is different in the southeast than it is here in the Northwest. So what they do here, we kind of have an understanding of. We have a lot to learn about what goes on in the southeast and other parts of the country. It's not just those two parts, because we have the Northeast and the Southwest as well, where there's plenty of activity. But we have to look at the context. How do they need to survive in those places? Given the conditions.
Right.
And if you can figure that out, you pretty much know what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah. That the area where I'm at, Will, it's so dense, in the forest. It is just so thick in so much of the area that they probably really don't have to go too far from, their food source to sleep.
Yeah, typically not.
You know, if he could find a good thick brush to lay in, nobody would ever see him, ever, because the brush is just so dense up in this area.
The thing is though.
Of course, do I know that?
The one thing to remember though with hunting and game animals, especially where the elevation is the way it is in the Northwest, there's a lot of hills and mountainous terrain. Is you always want to be, if you're a predator, you want to be upwind of the game animals, so they're not aware of where you are. You know what I mean? So you could just go off a short distance and crash out, but it would defeat the purpose, because once the wind changes, in other words, when it cools at night, wind is going downhill. When the sun's up, it's going uphill. You want to be upwind of the game all the time. So that's why they would move. You know, they would bed in places where they're upwind of the game animals.
Yeah, I you know, they're pretty intelligent animals.
Absolutely.
You know, and if it's a windy day, that would determine where the heck they're going to.
Oh yeah.
You know, put their stock on a hide. If it's a calm day, you know, the thermals are going to push the scent up. Morning times or at night, it's going to change direction, go downhill. That kind of give you a pretty good idea where they're going to be bedding down.
And I learned that when I fought forest fire back in 1990. In the fire academy, we had to think about how the airflow was given a 24-hour time frame, because you didn't want to be, downwind of the fire, because you'd get burned over. And the same goes true with game.
I would love to get I'd love to take you and Milo up there and we could spend a week. Honest to God, I'd show you this area. You're just gonna freak out. Seriously, I'd love to get you and Milo up there.
Well, eventually we'll be there.
Gotta hope. I don't know how many more 12-hour shifts I can handle, Will. You better make it quick.
Yeah, I hear you there. I try to keep my overtime to a minimum. I try not to work too much. I'm getting too old for that kind of all that work anymore,
Hey, Will, what percentage?
I got 3 more years. Oh. Go ahead, Brian.
What's that, Brian?
Sorry. I was going to say, what percentage of the time do you think that they're alone versus what percentage are they like working in teams? Is it like 50-50, do you think, or?
It's really hard telling. I guess it depends on the game and what their needs are.
Right.
But right now, what I was told, and it wasn't a great deal in terms of percentages. All they said was that part of the time, in the first hunt are individually. They do it individually, and that's to feed themselves, which makes sense because you're not doing anybody else any good if you can't function. So you need to function yourself. And I think most animals in nature are going to do that anyway. They're going to take care of themselves first, and then, other members of the group. When it comes to a collective hunt, and I'm thinking it may only be a collective hunt. May only be if they have the need to do that. If they don't, then they're probably going to stay. When they feed us as individuals all the time. If they don't need to bring things back, say for young or maybe an older member or something like that. And we don't really know what their outlook is, even on older members. Do they take care of them? Do they kick them out of the group and let them fend for themselves? I mean, we don't really know.
Right.
Bruce saying he's thinking that they look. I was just looking at what Bruce said, thinking that they look for strategic areas to bed down, areas where they can see all directions. Yeah, absolutely. They're going to want it's everything they do covers 2 areas. Well, actually, 1. Everything is about survival. Whether it's avoiding predators, us, or having to do with food. If you look at every single thing they do, it revolves around those 2 things. And also, those 2 things are the reason that we haven't brought one in yet, by the way.
Well, I think that they know their prey, and elk, deer, bear, they'll take the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. I don't think they necessarily have to see all around them, because or in every direction, because the simple fact that up here you're not going to be able to do that unless you're up on a ridge.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's my idea of that. But yeah.
See, now where Brian is, it's a completely different ballgame, because you don't really have the changes in elevation as much as there are here. It's not that pronounced, and like Brian said, or Bruce said, the ecosystem is completely different than this part of the country. So that's a whole different set of rules, and you've got a different type of creature.
Right.
They have a shorter temper. They seem to be a little bit more in more cohesive groups than say here, because of things I've heard, when they're seen, a lot of times they're in groups. Whereas, up in this part of the country, they're more, the encounters are more as individuals. So now whether that has to do with them being, closer to where they're hunting, or if it's a sentry or what have you, there are other factors like that that fits into that too.
Right.
I think up here they may separate in the morning, and they could collect in the evening, and then determine where they want to hunt.
Well, yeah, I'm sure the alpha, has that figured out, because we know based on the markings, the tree markings, when they snap them, if they're moving, especially from one area to the next, the alpha's already determined where they're going, and that's a marking for the rest to follow that direction. So, and then another thing too, Mark Dobbs, our anthropologist, I sent him some information about an ongoing situation, and he was telling me about aggressive behaviors, and that's something to consider too. We're seeing one of the things we're seeing, and this is from different parts of the country simultaneously. It seems like there's a lot of increase in aggressive behaviors in these things right now. And like Mark says, he says it could be due to breeding pressures. It could be due to, and he says that in areas where that's closer to where people are, where there's human encroachment, it affects the food supply. It affects a lot of things that they may do otherwise in other areas. So there could be some increased aggression with that. There's definitely some things going on, like our friends on the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. Wynn had a picture where one of these things threw a big chunk of wood at him, with such force it put a big dent in the side of his truck. And then there's, of course, the guy that got mauled in his house, and there were a couple other cases that I don't want to talk about yet, because they're kind of hush-hush right now. I don't want to put those out. They'd be great stuff to put on here, but I want to keep quiet about them. So, but we just know we've been seeing a real increase in the aggressive behaviors across the board right now. So there's something going on, whether has to do with breeding or conditions in their environment that's causing this upswing in behavior, or it could be just the fact that the population's increasing. We know that's going on, and the fact that they're losing their fear of people, because we're not doing anything aggressive to animals anymore in the wild.
Right. And I really think too that it's kind of a threat to their food supply too. As people expand into their area, I think they kind of view us as a threat.
Absolutely. Well, it definitely pushes their food out of an area. So if they've got a regular pattern they're following, then they've got to shift gears and do something different. And as that area shrinks, they're going to increase their agitation, certainly, because they're going to eventually have to be displaced out of those areas. And I know, Gerald, in your area, I'm sure the building has really moved up from the Columbia River area north. And I know they're limited on how far they can go north, but I know when I was working that area, in the 80s and 90s, they had pretty much free reign all the way down to the Columbia River, and now that's not the case. That area.
And they pretty much.
What's that?
I think they pretty much still do.
But you have a lot more people, especially.
I
know, like for instance.
Well, you can't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, where the correctional facility is, that we're up in southern Skamania County. They have a I think it's a minimum security correctional facility, and it used to be way out in the middle of nowhere. And now they're building houses right up into that area. So I mean, that used to be the southern part of that one group's range.
Yeah, but there's still so much area east of that. Yeah, that's still open.
True, but you've got another.
They've been doing a lot of logging, but
you've got another group on the eastern side there.
Right. And that's one I think I run into.
Yeah, it could very well be. And we don't really know a whole lot about that particular group. That's a more aggressive group than the northern group.
Yeah. And they have gotten aggressive. They've ripped trees out, slammed it down. And the one that I call Whistler, it scared the hell out of Robert. Robert got the hell out of the woods, and he got out fast when Whistler came in, because he took a tree that was 12 inches in diameter and broke it in half and threw it on the ground.
That's a pretty good feat of strength to do that. I mean, with a chunk of wood that size, I think I'd get out of there too.
That's no kidding. Yeah, and it flanked him. And they'll always flank you, no matter where you're at. They're going to flank you to where they want you to go.
Right. We hear,
and I think it throws a wrench in this. It throws a wrench in their sprocket when they flank you and you don't flank and you go basically at them. I think that throws a wrench in the sprocket, because they know that you have a weapon.
And that's one of the things too. I mean, one of the ways, like I was telling you about how you got out of that situation, was to pretend there were more people than were actually there, because that throws them off. If they don't know how many people are there, it kind of bugs them. If they think it's a numbers game, if there are more of them than there are you, they will be more aggressive. But if you can change that in their minds by talking out loud, like you're talking to the people that worked in your case, and there's another one is like, sometimes, because now remember, they view us as a predator. To them, we're dangerous.
Correct.
And because we come in numbers, you can sort of call their bluff by going at them, in an aggressive manner. And sometimes that'll work. Sometimes that'll make them take off if it throws them off. Whatever you can do to throw them off their game, a lot of times will work.
Yeah, normally when that happens, whenever we leave and we're leaving, they'll flank us and follow us damn near to our truck.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. And within 50 yards of the truck is when they stop, and we're able to go up over the berm and get down into our truck. Mm-hmm. And I just try to read it, as timing when they want us out of there. I try to, I think they're trying to work with me. I don't know. That's probably a stupid thing to say.
Well,
I don't know, but that's what
they're letting you know it's time to eat. So get out.
Exactly. And I think because we are so consistently there all the time, shows them that we're not leaving, but it gets to the point when they get aggressive, you get out of there.
Yeah.
And
listen,
like I said, come 6 o'clock, my ass.
That's right. Time to get out. Listen, fellas, it's just about time to wrap this up. Any final thoughts?
Not really. No.
Nothing, Brian?
Nothing here.
No.
No. Okay. Good. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us again this week. If anybody doesn't know, I've been putting these on YouTube, so I've got about half of them, not quite half up on YouTube so far. So I'm going to try to get the rest up. Check out the website, williamjevning.com. We've got about 600 members up there. One thing I did want to mention was, we're still trying to get the newsletter together. I know I've been saying that for a long time now, but it's been kind of a difficult thing because we've had several people said they were going to do it, and it hasn't happened yet. So David is actually going to start posting it. And as soon as Jeremiah's back, and I don't know, Don, if you have heard from him yet, but as soon as he's back, his sister Glenda has actually put several editions together. So all we have to do is get her to send that to David. He's going to put it in the format and post it to the website. Or actually, it's going to go out in emails. That's how the newsletter is going to go out to everybody who signed up. So if you're not a member of the website, go up there and join, and you'll get a newsletter sent to you. I think they're going to do them weekly. So I'm not really sure about how that's worked out just yet, but I know several editions are ready to go. They just need to be put into the template and sent out. So that's going to happen here real soon. And if you want to become a member of the Jevning Research Group as part of a field team or supporting members, get a hold of us, get a hold of one of the regionals on the website. You can just go to the drop-down menu on where it says field teams or research teams, and get a hold of one of the regional directors or assistant regional directors on there, or pretty much anybody that's up there, and any information will be sent where it needs to go, and join the teams, and we'll get this issue solved. So thanks, fellas. Glad you were on as always. Great questions, great thoughts, and we'll see everyone again next week. Night, everyone.